crying aloud, rise dead and meet the Lord.
Welcome to Night Ludlow and the Ludlow Historic Ghost Walk. Walk with us into the night as we retell some truly horrific tales. Here we are at the Hangman's Tree, also known as the Limb Tree. This tree has many stories to tell, one of which occurred many moons ago, long before the time of law and order, ladies and gentlemen. And I shall hand you over to the watchman who will tell you this tale.
Many years ago, a stranger to the town decided to enter the upper floors of a dining house. His intention was to steal valuables. Unfortunately, he was interrupted by a young maiden, and to silence her, he cut her throat gleefully from ear to ear, thereby causing a prodigious amount of blood, some of which seeped through the floorboards onto diners below, and a hue and a cry was instituted. They chased the assailant across rooftops and through alleyways, and finally caught him on this very spot, where, as a proponent of instant justice, I am glad to say they placed a noose around his neck, threw the rope across the bow, and hoisted him whilst kicking a macabre jig to his death. Justice was not only done, it was seen to be done.
And that's how they used to do it in the old days. But fast forward to 1736, and the way we hung them started to change, for it was deemed ungentlemanly for you to swing. So they invented the platform, the trapdoor, which tormented your soul. They would lower you before they hung you, just so you could see 6 inches from your feet and you could see the fate that awaited you. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, not a nice way to go. So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, at the Pendover Tower. And this is the story of Ludlow's most infamous ghost story. And it's the story of Marianne de L'Abreu. She was French, she was dressed in white, and she was beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, anyone at home French? Anyone at home dressed in white? We'll move quickly on then. Marianne was a princess and she was a Norman, and they occupied the castle, defending against the Welsh in the valley below. Times of war pursued, and in those days, ladies and gentlemen, love had to blossom quite quickly. Marianne, upon one summer, when there was a break in the peace, they held these festivals and jousting tournaments in the valley below. All of the knights from far and wide would come around and they would compete in the tournament, hopefully to be betrothed and find a prospective partner. All the strapping knights wanted to show their wares. And Marianne, upon this particular tournament, was sitting in her box, and she eyed a possible suitor. There in the background was a strapping Welshman. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the conflict between the Normans and the Welsh was intermittent. And the Welshman had come from a very prestigious family. But he won his tournaments, he won the whole competition, and he strode to Marianne, for he was interested. And love did blossom. And the months that followed, ladies and gentlemen, he illicitly would come and visit her in her bedchamber, whereupon she would light a candle to give the signal that no one else was around. And she would lower a rope. And the Welshman would come up and he would duly climb the rope. And what shall we say? He entered her bedchamber. Whereupon they did tapestry. The months that followed, the love blossomed. But towards the latter part of the year, one night when he was visiting Marianne, instead of pulling the rope up, he left it dangling. The Welsh assassins made their way up the embankment. They wrapped their swords in muslin. They climbed the rope. They entered into the castle, made their way through the inner bailey, into the outer bailey, slitting the throats of the guards. Late at night, Marianne awoke in her bed. She turned. Where was her lover? What was that noise? She got out of bed in her robes. She made her way down the corridor and turned the corner. She saw blood on the walls. What's this? I shall be speaking with the maids in the morning. How dare they? But it's when she turned the next corner, she saw her first body, and she stopped. She was shaking with fear. Something was amiss. And then she looked out the window, and she could see what was happening. She became terrified, and she fled, and she hid. The night had passed, and then she drew up her courage and made her way back to the bedchamber, trying to find her lover who would protect her. But alas, as soon as she got there, she saw him. She saw him wipe the blood from his sword, place it against the wall, and climb into bed. Her fear turned into rage and anger, and the red mist enveloped. She strode forward, entered the bedchamber, picked up the sword, and thrust it through his body, with the blade snapping on the stone below. She stood there, frozen in time. Her world had just collapsed. Her family were dead. Her lover had betrayed her. That's what she worked out. What would she do? Her fear, her anger, her sorrow turned to despair. And on her heel, she gathered her robes and she made her way to the top of the tower. Up the stairs, and when she got onto the ledge, she looked out upon the moonlit night, the clouds covering the moon, and she made her decision. Yes, that was it. That was the end for life. She had nothing more to live for. So into the night, she closed her eyes and she leapt. And she leapt to her death. Not a nice way to go, ladies and gentlemen. However, like the innocence of Marianne, if you were to come down here at night, late at night, you might just hear her screams all that time ago. But Marianne, dressed in her white robes, was a picture of innocence, like the white feather or white petal. And ladies and gentlemen, My name is Dr. Atlas, and I did frequent this town in 1870s. And I moved here from North London. Whereupon I met Mr. Beltane, who actually is off this evening doing some horrible, disgusting work, no doubt. And I also met the watchman. Yes, and between us we had a wonderful, wonderful little side business where we used to sell bodily parts to medical science and also to some more unsalubrious types of people. In the 1870s, ladies and gentlemen, lots of things were happening in the medical science. In fact, lots of things were happening. And the story I'm about to tell you is one of being buried alive. It is a terrible fate, ladies and gentlemen. No one can see you. No one can hear you. No one much cares that you're there. After all, you are meant to be dead. Yes. You see, in the Victorian era, ladies and gentlemen, we didn't have the innovation that you have today. So if someone were to appear to go into a comatose state, we couldn't keep them alive for 10, 15 years, no. The body was inspected, the death certificate was signed, and away you go. See you on the other side. But ladies and gentlemen, something terrible was happening. In 1875, it was found in this country, out of all the people that were buried, over 4,000 people were found to have been wrongly, or rightly, buried alive. Remember, no one can see you, no one can hear you, no one much cares that you're there. After all, you're meant to be dead. Now, the problem was such in London, we had a problem in burying people. Some graveyards had bodies stacked on top of one another with only inches from the surface, from the flesh. And the stench, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the stench was awful. The lady with their gay poses would walk and avoid the graveyards. Oh yes, such was the stench. Even in the centre of London, I believe it was 1874, they invented, what was it now? The necropolis. It was a railway, and they took the bodies out of London to a place the size of Ludlow, and they buried them. Such was the demand. And the other thing is, ladies and gentlemen, the problem of burial and the classes. It was fine if you were upper class, your family would have had its plot already placed, waiting your arrival. If you was poor, no worries, you were just flung in a pit across the river. However, the stack up of bodies and unavailable space to bury the middle classes proved a very poignant point. And in most places, we had to come up with temporary burials where the body was taken, and then when such a time a place became free in the local graveyard, you were then interned. So it was a horrible time indeed. When I made my way here to Ludlow, my first case was of a man who was 42 years of age. His wife looked out upon the window and she saw her loved one clutch his chest, fall to his knees and keel over. She dropped everything, she ran into the field, she got to his body and she broke down and wept. She called for the doctor, I arrived on horseback, and I too inspected the body, and he was placed not too far away from here in a temporary grave. Upon the turn of a moon, we went back to place his coffin in an available space in his local church. And we were truly horrified upon what we found, for we noticed that the coffin had been disturbed. So when we opened the coffin lid and we looked inside, we could see that the shroud had been torn and shredded. There were traces of fingernail, there was droplets of blood. When we looked into this man's eyes, it looked like he died of sheer fright. He tried, after waking in his coffin, to scratch and claw and do anything to get out of his entombment, and he died there, slowly suffocating to death. A truly gruesome way to go. But it was not the only body that I saw. Just before I left London, I was called to a location. We saw another fellow that had this fate bestowed upon him. He was a young man, he was only 21 years of age. And we opened the coffin, the same scene was presented to us. In fact, this young man tried so much to get out of his entombment, his body was like a broken doll. He smashed his ribs, he broke his legs. But what sent a shiver up my spine was the look in his eyes. You see, ladies and gentlemen, in the Victorian era, we believed that the eyes were the keys to the soul. And on murder victims, upon the invention of the camera, it was believed that the photo that was taken of the eyes would reveal in the photo negative the image of the murderer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this was happening not only in this country, this was happening everywhere. But, and excuse the pun, people were waking up to what was going on in those years, and people were generally afraid. Some of the wealthy actually employed these brass makers to make these wonderful ornate little bells. And the idea was thus: those bells were placed on the tomb in the graveyard, whereupon a cord would go down 6 foot under into the coffin and into the palm of the deceased. Whereupon, if that person were to tug on the cord, if they were to tug on the cord, indeed. Now then, ladies and gentlemen, if you happened to be unfortunate enough to be walking through that graveyard the dead of night, just pray that you don't hear a bell.
I must be gone forever now, and leave you here behind, until the resurrection comes and judgment to mankind. When Christ comes riding on the clouds to judge the world abroad, angels and saints crying aloud, rise dead and meet the Lord.
Ada was going to the castle for the midsummer market and fair, 'Twas a long way to walk all the way from the bog, but out Ada her didna care. Her set off with her basket full to the brim with all sorts of stuff her could sell. Jams, pickles, butter, 2 dozen fresh eggs, and wimbry pies, 'cause they always sowed well. The castle was busy and bustling. There were stalls laid out all down the street, selling live poultry and pigs and tranquilments, clothing, shoes, fish, bread and meat. Ada enjoyed a good gossip, oth folk had not seen for a year. By late afternoon her'd sowed everything and thought her could manage a beer. Well, as you know, in Bishop's Castle there's plenty of places to quench one's thirst, but Ada decided to try the 3 Tons. That's where her sampled her first. The ale soothed her dry throat like warm honey, and her thought her could manage another. Her just started her 3rd when Edith came in, with Tom the liar, her brother. Tom was a fibber, but he was great company. He always had such tales to tell. So Ada agreed very readily to go with him to the Castle Hotel. Here they just had a couple, 'cause the vault was next on the list. By now they'd been joined by some more old friends, all merry, all a bit. Well, you've got the gist. The vault was throbbing to the beat of a band, and then a good-looking young chap got up and sang, well, sort of shouted some words. Ada thought it was rap. From there they went down to the King's Shed, hoping to get some food. Unfortunately, they were all sowed out, so they just had a couple there, not to seem rude. And from there they went down to the boar's shed, where they ate some boar. Bacon, I think. Ada said it was tasty but salty, which is why they all needed another drink. They finished the evening down at the 6 Bells. There was folk music, it was real merry. It was after 11 by the time they came out, but out Ada her didna worry. Her pockets were empty, but her belly was full. I wunna bother to walk one, her said. I'll stay in the place I've stayed afore. I dunna mind sharing a bed. And with that, she went into the graveyard, found a flat stone under which her could creep. In the hollow beneath it was cosy and dry, and Ada was soon sound asleep. But Ada, one of the only one party in that night, a group of young men from Clon staggered out of the 6 Bells with jugs of ale, reluctant to end such great fun. Gentlemen, said their leader, I'm sure there's a table in here somewhere. And he led them right to the very same stone, never knowing that Ada was there. They stood round the stone laughing and joking, having a real good time, till at midnight they all fell silent as the clock on the town hall started to chime. Gentlemen, said their leader again, how could we so misbehave? Why, we've not even offered our kind host a drink. And he waved his jug of ale down by the grave. They laughed, till a bony hand and a scrawny arm, in the moonlight glowing pale, snaked from under the gravestone and reached for the jug of ale. They watched in horrified fascination the jug of ale disappear. They heard a soft slurp, followed by a loud burp. Then their leader cried, I'm out of here! They fell over each other in their haste to escape, but proved though they were drunk, they could run, and probably broke some world records on their journey that night back to Clon. And Ada, well, her was quite undisturbed. As her finished the last dregs of ale, her thought, I must tell Edith and Tom about this. I know how they like a good tale. And next morning her woke, bright and early, seemingly no worse for wear, and her smiled to herself as her wandered back wham, looking forward to the Michaelmas fair.
Hi there, I'm going to be showing you how to bake a beautiful squash to impress your friends and have a very pleasant Halloween feast using local and seasonal produce. So there are many squashes in the world, lots of shapes and sizes. This one you probably know best, the butternut squash. But tonight we're going to use this beauty, which is an ichikuri squash or possibly an acorn squash, but not your large, enormous pumpkins. So you want to look for something a little bit smaller, which has got good flesh, that's good for baking and very tasty to go with it. So I'm going to show you that, but first of all, we get to prepare some of our greens. So we've got a lovely, fresh Savoy here, and we're going to break off. So just remember, this recipe is for one person. Obviously, if you've got friends, which I hope you will have on Halloween evening, and you're going to be baking your squash together, you'll need one squash per person. And you need probably 2 leaves per person as well. So with the leaves, we're just going to cut them and braise them in a pan. We're going to cut out the tough stem in the middle, and then I'm just going to cut along the grain so you get a nice tender braised green that's good for you, tasty, not overcooked, still with a bit of texture. We're going to cook this with some butter and some white wine. So don't drink all the wine before we start. It's important to ensure we have some left over. So first of all, I'm going to pop a little bit of butter, about 10 grams, not much. Obviously double it up if you've got friends coming and you're cooking more of the cabbage. And we're going to put that in the pan. I'm just going to slice it sort of that sort of size, so it's sort of mouth size, and we're just going to pop that in the pan like so. Butter's melting nicely. There's nothing better than braised Savoy cabbage when it's in season, because it's this beautiful dark green colour. And it will be, what you'll be using this for is dipping it into your baked squash soup in a minute. So that's in. We're going to drop some of the white wine in. Thankfully, there's some left in the bottom of the bottle. You hear it sizzle away. And with braising, you always put the lid on. It's really important. So it slowly cooks. And you want that on a moderate heat. I'm going to turn it up to start with, but then just listen and turn it down a little bit once it gets going. So whilst that's on, we're going to prepare our squash. So as I said before, we're going to go for the little acorn squash. And with this, we need to chop the top off and just hollow it out. So I've cheated slightly and made a bit of a cut in the top here. Obviously you'll need a sharp knife for this, but we want to do it so you have a little lid which comes off like that. Okay, so big enough so that you can get, your guests can get their spoons in to spoon out their delicious cooked flesh. But obviously, first of all, we need to just scoop out with a larger spoon the centre and get out all of the innards. So we don't really want any of the seeds, pumpkin seeds, though they are delicious, baked slowly in the oven. We're going to get those out for today and ensure that what we will have is just the nice, delicious flesh left. So this is going to be baked in the oven for up to an hour on about 180. So you need to put your oven on now if you're doing this at home. I'm cheating because I did one earlier. But basically you want to move all the sort of loose matter from the middle, take it all out. So it's relatively smooth on the inside. Make sure you've got all the seeds out as well, because that wouldn't be great. So nice, smooth, empty pumpkin. And in here, we're going to add some deliciousness. So we've got beautiful local cream, Morley milk here. And we're going to put in some single cream, 130 grams of that. Pour that in. And then a little bit of double cream on the top. So it is a treat, but just remember that this will be eaten with all the delicious veg flesh of the pumpkin squash inside and the Savoy cabbage as well. Just going to give my little Savoy cabbage a shake. Make sure it's okay. Just get a little spoon. Let's give it a stir. It smells delicious. And then, just before we put the pumpkin in the squash in the oven, we want to grate some cheese. We need about 60 grams. So the cheese, what I recommend is a good strong cheddar type cheese. This one is White Fox, a local cheese from North Shropshire. Delicious. And you want to grate this straight into the pumpkin. So easy. Once it's full, you can literally, all you need is the cream and the cheese in there to start with. And you want to just chop the top of the lid so it's nice and flat. But what you want to do is put that back on and make sure that that's sealed tight, and that goes straight in the oven. Okay, and that goes in the oven now for like 50 minutes. And you'll bring it back out, and it should be, the flesh should be done, it should be soft. And we'll check the one I've got from earlier. So I'm going to pop that there. Pretend that's in the oven now, bubbling away nice and happily. And then what we'll do is turn my pan down, let that steam. And we're going to toast some cob nuts now. So cob nuts are, again, these are local, forage from a garden not far from here. So cob nuts, a bit like hazelnuts, they're fresh this year's. So what you want to do is eat them before they become too dry, and they're like got a milky ness to them, which makes them really delicious to add to food. But what we want to do first, obviously, is take off its shell. So you want to hold it in your hand, get a nutcracker, and just give that a little crack. Inside you'll get the actual nut. Delicious. And what we're going to do is just dry fry them in a pan, just to sort of toast them slightly, bring out the flavours, bring out the oils. So you want a handful of each. Don't put the ones with the shells still on there. Take those out. There we go. I'd say that's enough for one person. About 6 or 7. That's a bit generous. I think it says 5 in the recipe. And you just want to turn on the heat on your frying pan and just dry fry them. You don't need any oil, you don't need water or anything. You just want to slowly toast them. Pretend you're by the fire maybe, but not. And you're doing it all with the power of a saucepan and your hob. And that should just nicely toast. And what we'll find is that the skins on the outer shell will come off in a minute once they're done. So just going to give those a shake. Turn that right up. We'll check our Savoy. Just make sure that's cooking nicely. You don't want to overcook it, but then we want a bit of texture in there as well. So you don't want to burn your nuts. Unfortunately, you don't want to burn your nuts because they'll go bitter. So I'm going to take those out of the pan now. They're nice and hot. Nice hot pan. Obviously, be careful at home when you do this. I'm going to pop them on my chopping board. I'm just going to chop them up because actually they're nicer. You get more flavour if you chop them up and break them up a little bit. They're quite large to have as a single nut. And what you'll also find is that the skins will break off a bit, which will be nice. The skins are fine. You can eat the skin. There's nothing wrong with the skin. But actually, the fuller flavour is in the actual nut itself. And they've got this creamy, lovely, delicious texture as well. So, here's one I prepared earlier. A baked pumpkin or squash. So it's got the cream inside and the skin around the flesh, around the outside is just soft. If you just, the way to test it is just get your knife and just touch the sides and you'll see it's soft. So what you can do, just to finish off now, is add your cob nuts. Sprinkle those on the top. And then you want a lot of salt and pepper and nutmeg, and we want to put some caraway seeds in the Savoy as well. The Savoy should be done now, so I'm going to add the caraway to that. Just a sprinkle. And then a good dose of black pepper. And some salt. It's the first time we've added salt to the recipe. And then if I'm lucky, I'll find my nutmeg, which is here somewhere. And then we're going to grate some of the nutmeg on the top. There we go. I'm going to use that one. Grate some nutmeg, because that will just help bring the flavour out of the squash, which is quite a nutty flavour. So the nutmeg and the cob nuts really help with that. And then lastly, we're just going to stir in those caraway seeds into that Savoy cabbage. With a bit more time, you could make it look delicious. I like serving it in this dish, and you can put the Savoy cabbage round the edge like this. So it looks as though the squash has returned back to the pumpkin patch. It looks very, very attractive with the bright orange of the skin of the squash and then the dark green of the Savoy. It looks rather good. And then don't forget, it's got to be served with the lid back on. And then there we go. One baked squash straight from the pumpkin patch. Ready. So when you eat it, you take your top off and you pick up your Savoy and you dip it in and you eat it and enjoy it with all your friends on Halloween.
His young wife died suddenly. She lay upon the bed, her death known only to him. He could not accept that marriage might end so fruitlessly. He ran down to the old wise woman who lived on Prolly Moor. She met him at the door, saw the pinched whiteness of his face. "If you want your wife back," she said, "you must go up Adston Lane to the Wailing Gate, which overlooks Black Fields. Go at the hour of midnight." "What shall I see?" he asked. "At that hour the dead dance, and if you are quick you may snatch your wife from the circle and bring her home again." He turned to rush off, forgetting thanks, and she drew him back. Not to chide, but to warn. "Be careful, for the fair folk dance among the dead." Just before midnight, he came to the gate. The ghostly moon laid a trail of silver o'er the fields. None of his neighbours knew he was abroad. The wind blustered, holding within its husky throat the cries of wandering souls. A light sprang up, and the ghostly dancers began their revelry. To the skirl of pipes and the beat of a drum, the dead kicked up their heels and swirled before him, bright as fallen stars. The longer he looked, the more he could see the soft sheen of decay on their cheeks, the coal black emptiness of their eyes, and their blood-red lips. He leapt over the gate, came close to a group, inhaled the scent of flowers and poisonous fruit. Moonlight shimmered in their hair. He swung around like a child trying to mount a fairground horse, dizzy and out of breath. A face loomed close, that of his newly dead wife. He reached out, grasped her hand, and pulled her from the circle. For a moment, the music faltered, and the rhythm of dancing feet was checked. Back down the lane he led his bride, holding her around the waist. She looked pale, so pale, as she glanced at the dancers left behind. They reached the cottage. He lifted the latch and brought her inside and laid her on the bed where not long before her corpse had lain. He brought dandelion wine, and she seemed to revive and gazed on him with focused eyes, no longer like a traveller yearning to depart. None of his neighbours knew she had gone and returned, only the old wise woman who came to inspect the wife and pronounced her well again. 2 handsome children she bore the man, both fair, boy and girl. They played happily as one, twining flowers in their hair. One night, the father woke to find the children gone, their bed empty where they used to lie in each other's arms. He sat up till dawn. Back they came, smiling as if no harm were done. He scolded them and made them tell where they had been. Why, to Black Fields, they said. We saw fair folk dancing, and one of them as like to mother as could be. His wife had not left her bed. You shall not go again, he told them. And though they promised, their eyes smiled, covering their guile. The next time, the children did not return from their nocturnal tryst. The wife found her husband in tears. I told them they should stay, he cried. Her eyes flashed brightly, and the flesh on her cheeks shrank. What will you do? She asked. Go get them back, as you did me.
I'm Sean Ward, distiller of Ludlow Dry Gin, and we're with you this evening. We're going to make a vampire martini, something extra spooky for the weekend. So we're going to use Ludlow spiced gin, and our main ingredient is Dubonnet. Now Dubonnet, many of you might have heard of. This is the Queen's favourite tipple. She has one every evening before supper. This is red wine with some coffee, some orange rind and secret spice blend. Really great stuff. So, our vampire martini. You need a martini glass. Ideally, you put this in the freezer before. If you haven't got a freezer, you can just put some ice cubes in the top. So we've had our ice cubes in here for a little while. We're going to put that into the cocktail shaker, which we'll use in a moment. Now, you then need a bowl with some lemon juice, and you're going to take the edge of the glass like so, and just coat the edge of the glass with lemon juice. We've prepared in the other bowl some red sugar with some red food colouring and sugar just in a jam jar, good stir and a shake, and the sugar goes red. You now apply the edge of the glass that you've put the lemon juice with the red sugar, and you get this lovely little decoration around the edge. Great, so nice red theme, there we go. I think you can probably see that on camera. So there's our 2 little parts there, we'll put that out the way. Okay, so into the shaker, we're going to put 2 parts Dubonnet, There's a double measure there of Dubonnet and a single measure of gin. Ludlow spiced in this case. Okay, there we go, which is great for that winter evening. And good shake. Right, okay. I'm going to strain this into the glass, like so. So if the glass is pre-chilled in the freezer, it's great, because that just helps to cool the liquid. It's great to chill the Dubonnet and the gin as well. There we go. Okay, so we've got our dressed glass, we've got the drink in there, and then the final ingredient is a Luxardo maraschino cherry. These are absolutely delicious, essential for your cocktail cabinet, and adds a little bit more red fleshiness to our vampire cocktail. Excuse fingers there. The Dubonnet and the Luxardo cherries are available online, easily delivered to your door, and we've got ours from a local shop here, Secret Bottle Shop in Hereford. So there we go, the Vampire Martini, Dubonnet gin, just with a little maraschino cherry and our red sugar.
Have danced in a green bay, great rage against the dying of the light. While men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late, they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night, but rage, 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 rage against the dying of the light, against the dying of the light. But rage, 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 rage against the dying of the light, against the dying of the light. Great men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and decay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my Father, there on that sad height, curse, bless me now, with your fierce tears I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night, but rage, 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 rage against the dying of the light, against the dying of the light. Rage, 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 rage against the dying of the light, against the dying of the light. There's 2 or 3 hearty lads standing hard by. We are come a-souling good nature to try. We are come a-souling as well does the beer, and all that we soul for is ale and strong beer. For we come a-souling, for souling time's here, and souling time's here for is ale and strong beer. The streets they are gotten dark, dirty and cold. We are come a-souling, this night we'll make bold. We are come a-souling, as well does the beer, and all that we soul for is ale and strong beer. Oh, we come a-souling, for souling time's here, and souling time's here for is ale and strong beer. Abroad in your meadows, alone in your streets, if this be a good house, we shall have some relief. If this be a good house, as well doth the beer, well, all that we soul for is ale and strong beer. For we're come a-souling, for souling time's here, and souling time's here for is ale and strong beer. Go down to your cellar, and there you shall find both ale, beer, and brandy, and the best of all wine. And when you are drawing, don't let your heart fail, but bring us 1 jug of your bonny brown ale. For we're come a-souling, for souling time's here, and souling time's so full is ale and strong beer. Now Christmas is coming, it brings us good cheer, and when it is over, it's never near. Returning your thanks for your ale and strong beer, we'll come no more a-souling till this time next year. For we're come a-souling, for souling time's here, and souling time's so full is ale and strong beer.
This is the end of Late Night Ludlow, and we hope you've enjoyed the show. For it is not the end of the world, but rather the end of today.